Welcome and thank you for joining today's teleconference, Excess Behind the Meter Production Training. Before we begin, please ensure you have opened the chat panel by using the associated icon located at the bottom of your screen. If you require technical assistance, please send a chat to the event producer. All audio lines have been muted until the Q&A portion of the call. We will give you instruction on how to ask a question at that time. With that, I'll turn the call over to Cynthia Hinman, Lead Client Trainer.
Thanks, Booker. Hello, and thank you for joining us today for the Access Behind the Meter Pre-Market Sim Training Webinar. As Booker mentioned, my name is Cynthia Hinman, and I'll be taking you through today's session. I'm joined virtually by some of my colleagues who may speak up during the Q&A to provide clarity as needed when we discuss this topic. They will be introducing themselves in a minute. In an effort to increase transparency and provide greater service to our stakeholders, we're recording this webinar. It'll be posted on our website so that you can review it in the future and for those who are not able to join the call today. After this training is complete, these slides will be posted on caiso.com along with the recording once we have it, and it will be found in the Learning Center under the Participate tab, and it'll be in the New Modules section. So also, as we progress through the training, as Booker mentioned, I'm going to stop for question and answer periods, and I'll be documenting any questions that you may have and update the training before I post it. So with that said, I'm first going to have my subject matter experts introduce themselves. So Gabe, you want to start?
Hi, this is Gabe Murtaugh, lead policy developer in the policy team, and I worked on putting this policy together through the stakeholder process.
Thank you. Alexandra?
Hi, this is Alexandra Dasku. I'm part of Market Settlements Design Configuration, so I worked on the settlements configuration guide.
And Swami?
Hey, I'm part of the product management group. I'm responsible to manage this group product moving forward.
And I apologize to any of the other subject matter experts that might be on the call that I did not call on, but if you have some input, please don't hesitate to join in and please introduce yourselves. So let's start off with an example to show what we're talking about with this excess behind the meter production. Oops. Here we go. So this is Bob's house. And Bob got solar panels, and congratulations to him. On this particular day, they are producing 2 kilowatt hours of energy, and he is only consuming 1. Let me get rid of this right here. And the issue is that when meter generation is greater than the host load, which is what we're looking at here, there was not a uniform way to submit that meter data to the ISO. And in fact, different utilities, different scheduling coordinators were doing it different ways. So we created a policy, which is the excess behind the meter production, in order to align everybody so that everybody is doing it the same way. So what's the big deal? Why do we even care? Well, because different SCs were doing it different ways, there was inconsistent reporting of the load data, the meter data for the load, which caused more UFE, unaccounted for energy. We did not allocate our settlement charges appropriately because we were doing it differently for different SCs. And it also caused inaccurate demand forecasting. So that's what prompted us to take a look at this and come up with this policy. So the excess behind the meter production provisions that are going to be changing effective January 21st of 2021, we're going to be updating the tariff and some BPM definitions and specifying rules for submitting meter data because we're going to be doing it with this new excess behind the meter production value, and we're going to clarify settlement allocation formulas. So let's start out with some definitions. So we had a gross load definition, but now we're going to add in there that it includes loads served by excess behind the meter production. Excess behind the meter production shall not be netted against end-use customer load in determining gross load. So what do we mean by that? So let's take a look at Bob's house again. He's producing the 2 kilowatt hours of energy and consuming 1. And so the gross load is 0. It's not pulling any energy from the grid. Bob's house is using the energy produced by the solar panels that he's got. So his gross load, by this definition, is 0 kilowatt hours. The next definition, which is new, is excess behind the meter production. And the definition for that is energy from an end-use customer in excess of its on-site demand. So in this case, the excess behind the meter production is that 1 kilowatt hour that's not being used to serve Bob's house, and it's being pushed out onto the grid. The excess behind the meter production there is 1 kilowatt hour. I think I'm going to stop right there just so we're setting the stage, Booker, and make sure that everybody's clear on that and see if there are questions.
As we move to Q&A, please press #2 on your telephone keypad to enter the question queue. You will hear a notification when your line is unmuted. At that time, please then state your name and question. Once again, pressing #2 will indicate that you wish to ask a question. We don't have any questions in the queue currently.
All right, great. So now what we're going to talk about is, now that we have this new thing called excess behind the meter production, we have some new requirements for metering. So let's take a look. This is an example of an aggregation of a single household for 1 hour. So you can see the first column there, the meter polling time interval is for the 1205 to 1300 time frame. And then we have 3 main columns: the behind the meter, the at the meter, and then the hourly meter value. So starting with the behind the meter, there's those 2 columns. There's the full load, which is everything that is being consumed, and then how much is solar. You can see for all the intervals in column 2, which is the full load, it's 5 kilowatt hours. I'm so used to working in megawatt hours, I'll probably say megawatt hours, but in this case it's kilowatt hours. And then you'll see in the 3rd column that the solar is producing a certain amount in different intervals. So like for the first 5 intervals, it's 2 kilowatt hours, and then it goes up to 6, which is actually more than the load. And then it goes back down in the last 4 intervals. So when we're looking at what is at the meter, and we're going to break that down into the gross load and the excess behind the meter production. And the way that we do that is we're going to look at the full load, and if the full load is more than that solar, then we're going to do a subtraction. So if you look at the first interval there, you can see that at 1205, the load was 5 kilowatt hours. The solar was producing 2. So the gross load was 3. That's what was being pulled, metered on, so to produce energy to serve the load at that house that was not being covered by the solar. So that's the gross load. You can see when we get down around the 1230 time frame, the solar actually was producing more than the load was. So if you look at the calculation there for gross load, it says if column 2 is greater than column 3, then subtract column 3 from column 2, or else it's 0. So since the load was being completely covered by the solar there, that would be considered 1 megawatt of excess behind the meter production. You can see that in column 5 there. So 1 kilowatt hour, is being pushed back out onto the grid from the solar. It's the excess production. You can also see there when you look at columns 4 and 5 that either there's going to be a number in gross load or there's going to be a number in the excess behind the meter production. It's going to be one or the other. So this is the way it worked out for this particular hour for this household. Now we need to know what the hourly meter value is, which is the last two columns. What we do there is for the gross load, we're going to add up everything in the gross load at the meter, the column 4 there, and it comes up to 25. And then we are going to subtract the excess behind the meter production so that the gross load then is only 22 kilowatt hours. So, and the formula there above column 6 says if the sum of 4, the gross load, is greater than the excess behind the meter production, which is column 5, then the sum of gross load minus the sum of excess behind the meter, or else 0. So you're taking that 25, that's the sum of column 4, and the 3 kilowatt hours, that's the sum of column 5, and subtracting them, and you're coming up with 22 kilowatt hours. Column 7 is doing pretty much the same thing, but we're looking at the excess behind the meter production, and if the sum of the excess behind the meter production was greater than the gross load, which it's not, then you would do that same subtraction. But in this case, the gross load is higher, so the excess behind the meter production is 0. So for this particular household, for the meter, for that hour, it's 22 kilowatt hours gross load and 0 for the excess behind the meter production. So now we've looked at home 1, and the example on the previous slide is the 22 kilowatt hours of gross load and the 0 kilowatt hours of excess behind the meter production. Now, how does that work with all the other homes in that lab? So we'll do an example with 3 houses here. The first one has, as you can see, the 22 kilowatt hours of gross load. The second home has 15 kilowatt hours of gross load. Now the third home, it turns out that their excess behind the meter production was more than their gross load, so they have 10 kilowatt hours of excess behind the meter production. Logically, I'm not sure how that would happen within the same lab with maybe all the exact same houses with the same solar panels, but we'll use it for our example. So the total for that load aggregation point, or lab, there's 35 kilowatt hours of gross load for that lab and 10 kilowatt hours of excess behind the meter production. Gross load with gross, and that's what's going to be used for settlements. We have to look at the distribution loss factors and take the losses into account when we're looking at what's going to be used for settlements. So you can see the first 2 columns there are the hourly meter values from the previous slide. There's gross load of 35 kilowatt hours and the excess behind the meter production of 10. In our example, and this is just a given, there's no calculation there, we just picked this number, it's 0.1 is the distribution load factor. That's loss factor. That's what the DLF stands for, so that's the factor that we're going to apply to determine the losses. So we take that distribution loss factor, and this is in column 4, and we're going to figure out the losses from the gross load. And we do that by multiplying that 10% by 35. And we come up with 3.5 kilowatt hours. We also have to determine the avoided losses from the excess behind the meter production, and we do that by multiplying that distribution loss factor to the excess behind the meter production. And then we're going to come up with the gross load. And what we do then is we take that gross load, we add in the losses, and then we subtract out the avoided losses. So you can see in that yellow column there for MRIS, we're looking at the 35, column 1, plus the losses, which is 3.5, so we're at 38.5. And then we're going to take out the avoided losses, which is the 0.1, and come up with a total of 38.4 kilowatt hours. So the gross load, gross up calculation using the distribution loss factors considers losses from transmission to distribution interface as well as the avoided losses due to any excess production at the meter. So that's how we come up with that gross load with gross up that's going to be used for the settlement calculation. You'll notice on the bottom there, it also says there's more examples in the FAQ. I'll show you where there is an FAQ related to excess behind the meter production, and it has a few more examples besides this one, so you can get more information. So who does this apply to? Well, it applies to scheduling coordinator metered entities, so SCMEs. This does not apply to ISO metered entities, EIM scheduling coordinators, certain publicly owned utilities, or metered subsystems. So if you're a scheduling coordinator metered entity, this applies to you. Let me give you a little more information about that meter submission. So the way that you submit meter data is not changing. You're still going to do it the same way. That gross up calculation that I gave to you on the 2 slides ago, or the previous 2 slides ago, is something the scheduling coordinator has to perform prior to submitting that meter data. That doesn't happen at the ISO. That's something you're going to provide to us. Values cannot be null or negative. There needs to be something in those fields. And the submit meter data payload is going to contain that load and excess behind the meter production field in it as of 1/1 of 21. So that's the metering portion. So Booker, I'm going to stop again and make sure and see if there are any questions about the meter submission requirements.
Okay. As we move to Q&A, please press #2. That prompts that you wish to ask a question in the queue. Once again, pressing #2 indicates that you wish to ask a question. There are currently no questions in the queue.
All right, great. And just a reminder that this will be posted, this presentation, and recorded. So if you do want to listen to it again or look at it again, it will be available for you. So there is going to be a new OASIS report. I'm sorry this picture is a little blurry. But when you go on to OASIS, there's going to be a new excess behind the meter production OASIS report. So it is going to be under the energy drop-down on OASIS. I know originally we were talking about having it under the, I think, pricing or system demand, I think, but it's actually going to be under the energy tab. So what you'll see here is the excess behind the meter production report. You can download it in XML or CSV. You're going to enter the date range that you're interested in looking at, and it's by TAC area, so you put in the TAC name. What it's going to provide to you is by hour the aggregated meter values by TAC. So that's something, you know, if you want to look at that, it's going to be available for you. So that is the report that is going to be provided. We're going to move on to settlements, and the gross load is changing, the definition. So it's going to really impact a lot of charge codes. The formulas aren't necessarily changing, but since gross load definition is changing, it will impact these charge codes and potentially some other ones, but these are the most common ones. And also, it's going to then impact what we call net load, because now the gross load meter and there's the excess behind the meter production. To get to the net load, you're going to take gross load and subtract the excess behind the meter. That is going to impact the UFE calculation in charge code 6474. And that will be, as you can see there, UFE is usually the sum of the generation imports minus the sum of the load and exports and transmission losses. But now you'll see that it is the sum of the generation meter and imports, which hasn't changed, subtracting out that net load plus the export intertime meter plus the losses. So that's a difference in this formula for UFE. So where do we go from here? Well, the milestones are coming up, of course, on July 27th, we're starting our market sim. So connectivity is going to begin on July 27th. And then the actual structure testing for this initiative will begin August 24th. This is going to be deployed on October 1st, but it's going to be effective January 1st. So when you hear that, you know, it's deployed October 1st, that doesn't mean that's when it's actually starting to be used. That will be January 1st, 2021, along with the market timeline transformation changes. There's 4 market sim scenarios, and you can get more information about those on the release planning webpage, but this is just a quick summary. The first one has to do with publishing the statements and invoices and looking at that UFE settlement. The second one is publishing recalc statement and invoices. The third one is publishing that report on OASIS, the excess behind the meter production performance report. And finally, calculating the tax charges based on previously submitted gross load values. So I'm gonna go through the wrap up, then I'll stop again for questions. So the BPMs that are impacted, definitions and acronyms is going to be impacted, but we only do those updates, I believe, quarterly, so you might not see it in coordination with all the other BPM updates, but the BPM will be updated to provide that gross load and the excess behind the meter production definitions. The metering BPM is going to be updated, market instruments and market operations. For settlements and billing, there's going to be configuration guides that are updated. The actual settlements and billing BPM I don't think is going to be updated, but you will see configuration guides that are updated. So market simulation, we're going to do the new meter measurement type with the excess behind the meter production. There's going to be the new OASIS report and the settlement of load-based charges for the ISO SCs. Market participants are going to be required to input both that gross load and excess behind the meter production information starting on 411 as separate measurement types under the same resource ID. If you want more information and background as to how we got here with the excess behind the meter production, you can look at all the proposals, the papers and things like that on the stakeholder process page. We also have the Board of Governors memos and their decision, and also the draft chair language, and you'll find it at the link on the bottom. And if you're more interested in the implementation of the initiative, you can look at the business requirements, that FAQ that I mentioned, and the FAQ example, and you'll find it at the link that I've noticed below. So I'm going to open it up for final questions.
As we move to Q&A, please press #2 on your telephone keypad to enter the question queue. It does appear that we have several questions in the queue.
All right.
Caller, go ahead, state your name and question.
Hi, this is Chen Yulong from PG&E. Hi, Cynthia. Has the training agenda, training material post under the training section on the CAISO website now, or
It's not there yet, but it will be, because if there was anything I had to change based on people's questions, I wanted to update it before I posted it. But it will be on the Learning Center on the ISO website under new modules.
Okay, thank you.
Okay. Sure. Next question.
Go ahead, caller. State your name and question.
Hi, Cindy. This is Chandra Morris from Smut and Bank. I just have a sort of a high-level question here. I want to make sure I'm thinking about this initiative correctly. So the access behind the meter data, is that only submitted under a load resource ID? I mean, generators, participating generators, for example, or just a regular generator that we bid into the MRTU, that doesn't require this, does it? Does that make sense?
Can one of my subject, go ahead. Can one of my, I think I know the answer, but I'd rather have a subject matter expert answer it.
Yeah.
Alexandra or Gabe?
This is Gabe. Yeah, I think you're right. Primarily, we're expecting this to be reported by mostly load lap areas. There are some, if you read the policy paper, that would be excluded and would not be required to report excess behind the meter production. But for most load lap areas, we would be expecting them to produce excess, or to provide excess behind the meter production numbers to the ISO. And yeah, generally you're right. This shouldn't be coming from generation.
Okay, good. Thank you very much for the clarification.
Yep, no problem.
And I'd like to just add one more thing, just because I saw a question go by. This does not apply to EIM entities. Next question.
There are no further questions in the queue.
All right, well, thank you very much. If you do think of questions, you can send an email to customerreadiness@caiso.com. And as I mentioned, I'm sorry?
Last second, we just got a question. 1 second.
Okay.
Caller, go ahead, state your name and question.
Hi, this is Damien Mungia from SDG&E. Just a quick question. For the MRIS, for the changes, are they already implemented in map stage so we can start testing, or?
I'm sorry, can you ask something? I didn't get all the words there.
So are the changes, are the changes for MRIS, are they already implemented in map stage? In the staging environment?
Are they already? Does anybody have the answer to that question? I mean, I'm assuming they will be implemented in map stage for the market, but we're going to have to find out that answer for you and send it out.
Okay.
We appear to have a couple more questions in the queue.
All right.
Caller, state your name and question.
Hello, good morning. My name is Nora Cachutaro from PGE. Thank you, Cynthia. Wonderful presentation. My question is, OASIS will be the only place that we actually can get report for this initiative, right? Or are there any other?
That is the only place that we are adding that in, yeah. Mm-hmm.
Okay. Thank you.
That is right.
Hello. Caller.
Hi, it's Sandra from it's Sandra from Smutton Bank again. When the previous caller mentioned MRIS, I had another question. So for like, let's say we have a generator where we're submitting meter data, are we going to be required to put zeros in an EDTMP column or anything like that, or for anything other than load resource ID, there will be no changes?
Can someone help with that question? I'm assuming since there was something that said it couldn't be null, I'm assuming that you're going to have to put something, but that's just my guess. Can somebody clarify?
Hi, Sandra. This is Alexandra. Yes, you will be required to submit 0 values. I believe Cynthia mentioned earlier it cannot be negative values, so if you do not have excess meter values, you're still required to submit 0 for that entry.
Okay, so basically any meter that we submit to you guys other than EIN entities, or will we have to do it for those generators as well?
This is only for
the load resources.
Yeah.
I'm sorry, I think I'm getting a little break up here.
Alexandra, can you repeat yourself again?
Sure. So typically for the load resources, so those that are eligible for their excess behind the meter production resources, you will have to submit 0 for those resources, for the excess behind the meter, if it is not greater than 0.
Oh, okay, but not for generators? Tell you what, my reception.
It is mostly load resources.
I was going to say, I'm sorry, my reception is so bad. How about I just submit this via email, and then we'll communicate that way. Sorry, it's like everything's cutting out. Must be on my end.
Oh. Okay. Sounds good. Thanks, Sandra.
There are currently no more questions in the queue.
All right. Well, thank you all very much. As I mentioned at the beginning of the session, the slides are going to be posted in the Learning Center, and we'll be posting the recording there as well. And again, you can send questions if you didn't get them answered here today at customerreadiness@caiso.com. So this concludes our webinar, and thank you so much. Have a great day.
That concludes our conference. Thank you for using Event Services.